Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome from the Center for Catholic Studies. My name is Nancy Dalla Valle. I'm the director of the center. This one-hour event is the second entry in an ongoing series we are calling Communicating Catholicism, in which those who work in Catholic media or evangelization or publishing speak to us about the work they do and the perspectives they engage. A similar ongoing series, this one virtual, called Gender and Catholicism, will happen in spring. But today's event is supported by students in RLST 1402, many of whom are in the audience here at Fairfield University. And so, to introduce our speaker, I would like to call upon a sophomore finance major from Hamden, Connecticut. Give it up for Mr. Michael Lai.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker today, Mr. John Grosso, who is a digital editor for an independent newspaper, the National Catholic Reporter. John holds a bachelor's degree in political science and theology from Boston College and a master's degree in corporate communications and public relations from Sacred Heart. With his experience in the social and multimedia industry, working for both the Roman Catholic Diocese of Bridgeport and for a major Catholic philanthropic group, John brings valuable insights to the table as we continue our course discussions on religion and contemporary culture. Today, John will be speaking on tweeting and tradition, so please join me in welcoming John Grosso.
How you guys doing? I'm never good at using a mic. I'm a really bad digital native when it comes to technology, which is no good. So today we're going to talk about tweeting and tradition, how a 2,000-year-old institution communicates. Right off the bat, you're going to notice a lot of icons, none of probably which of any social media account you use, and that's because the church is still very far behind where you guys are. We're terrible at TikTok and Snapchat and BeReal and whatever else is new that I haven't heard of because I'm in my 30s. That's going to be a theme. So what are we going to talk about today? The first is we're going to figure out, what does the Catholic media landscape look like? It's not positive, spoiler alert. How do stakeholders, that is the different organizations that make up the Catholic Church, communicate Catholicism? And then challenges and misconceptions that I hear about how the church ought to or should or does communicate. And then, because a lot of that's going to be a little pessimistic, we will end on optimism of how we move forward, communicating faithfully without being aggressive or weird. So what does today's Catholic media environment look like? Now, I apologize, all my memes are from Twitter and Instagram, because again, I'm 32, I'm old. And this is unfortunately very appropriate. It is a challenging, polarized, on-fire realm of people calling each other heretics, of people calling people out on the carpet for various things, and basically take what is happening in our secular communications, in the news that you watch or consume, in whatever fandom you might belong to. I mean, there are people screaming at each other online in slow cooking forums, because again, that's what counts for being relevant when you're in your 30s. You're looking up recipes. People have a lot of strong opinions. That's happening in the church communications as well. The difference is professionals like myself are slower to reckon with the fact that the environment is so challenged because we don't want it to be, and we feel like because we're communicating a kind of a higher purpose for a higher goal, we want to say that we've sort of evolved beyond it, but we really haven't. This is not fine. But to be more specific, the church, when we talk about communicating for the church, we have to recognize, number one, it's a multinational organization, an international organization with whose experience is local. My guesstimate here is that your experience of church, besides being here at a Catholic institution, is your local parish. If your parents made you go get your sacraments, if you're still practicing here, I'm not casting any aspersions, whatever it is, you do you. But your experience of the church is local. But the church is also an international body where a lot of what happens up in the Vatican or at a bishops' conference will have some sort of trickle-down effect on you. So it's important we figure out, how do these entities communicate? So internationally, the environment is challenged. It's polarized, just like the rest of our world is. Everyone's fighting about something. It's populistic. It's these rampant populism movements that are permeating our Western civilization spaces, and also our brothers and sisters in South America are channeling themselves into Catholic communications as well. It's very cult of personality centric. It's focused on one or two people that build affiliations. It's very tribalistic. It's balkanized, which is just a fancy way of saying people are now fleeing to spaces where they are only with people that agree with them. And at first, it was just accounts or publications. I work for National Catholic Reporter. It is a media entity that some might say covers more progressive Catholic issues. There are entire chunks of the Catholic population that just seeing that name alone, they will not consume any of our journalism, even if it's well-sourced, which it always is, even if it's from a reputable author, which it always is, just because of the name. But that's not even the whole story. Just like we're seeing in the secular world, people are fleeing to mediums where they agree with one another. So for instance, traditionally liberal people are leaving Twitter in droves. They're heading to Threads, they're heading back to Instagram, they're heading to Blue Sky. They're not really saying anything on Blue Sky, but that's where they're headed. Traditionally conservative people have Truth Social. No comment. But people are now, they're not just content to follow accounts with whom they agree. They need to go to an entire space where they never see a dissenting opinion, where that dissenting opinion is banned, not allowed. And that's what's happening in the church as well. Of course, there's a lot of anti-Pope Francis sentiment out there. There are people online, if you went by online metrics only, what you saw on X or even TikTok too, there's a growing movement there. You would think that people really don't like Pope Francis when poll after poll that's run by him, especially American polls, have him with an 80% approval rating, which, by the way, unheard of. I think that we don't have politicians. I don't even think we have like meals with 80% approval ratings in the United States. But there's a very concerted, hostile anti-Pope Francis campaign in the international Catholic world. And of course, there are also hostile algorithms. Depending on what site you use, for instance, X does not like progressive people posting, so that algorithm throttles progressive posts. Similarly, if you were to go on Truth Social and start talking progressive politics, you would be throttled as well. And Meta, after the 2016 election, Meta's Facebook and Instagram, deliberately prevents religious affiliated posts because it doesn't drive enough engagement or marketing or clicks. All of them have some sort of algorithmic hang-up for nonprofit religious entity communications, and that is what the church is. On the national level, local newspapers, secular and local newspapers are disappearing. So are Catholic local newspapers. So you used to have the ability to go to your local newspaper if you were having a fish fry, a potluck, but good news, fun community, well, fun is relative, but community engagement activities, positive news for the church, it was in your local paper or your local magazine. And bishops by the dozen are getting rid of those. They're too costly. The dioceses are in bankruptcy settlements and have to cut their chancery, which is their main office. And so these newspapers are often the first to go. And it's a real serious challenge because then there is no way to communicate local stories because an entity even like the National Catholic Reporter, we can't communicate 400 different smaller events, much though we would like to. We're also a small shop. There's also the outsourcing of diocesan communication. So bishops are starting to deconstruct their chanceries into parts. And so organizations exist to do a diocesan newspaper if it still exists, or to do a magazine if it still exists. Organizations now exist to do diocesan social media. It's usually not very good. It's canned, it's sort of a product. And so it's decentralization and delocalization of communication. So you're all kind of getting the same product as opposed to something that was hyper-localized, hyper-intentional for your needs and your community. And of course, the Catholic Church has decided that we like influencers. More on that later. Not very good. And if you're ever looking to get down a rabbit hole someday, you're bored, you need something to Google, Google Twitter, because it's still the Twitter priests. There's an entire community of clergy that have made it their mission to evangelize Twitter, and it is as problematic as it sounds. And then at the local level, there's this disenfranchisement with social media. It's been about 15, 20 years since social media has been very ubiquitous. We've gone through a dozen platforms. Everybody's on something different. And I think that these organizations that are made up of primarily older people that grew up in a time where media was used sort of as a means to an end are disenfranchised with it because social media didn't fulfill the promise of driving people to events, increasing donations, or otherwise moving people somewhere, or unifying people in any way. So there's this disenfranchisement with social media because generally people are looking at sort of this traditional metric of success. Well, more people in the pews. Well, that hasn't happened in churches. Or more donations. That also hasn't happened. And there's also increased competition. After the COVID-19 pandemic, if you weren't online, you had to be. The whole world moved online for essentially 6 to 18 months, depending on where you were. And the church was one of the last adopters of that, especially at the local parish level. So now when you have this flood of new accounts, new users that are terminally or chronically online, there's a lot more noise to cut through. And when you only have 300 or 400 followers, because Catholic accounts are not necessarily the most dynamic accounts in the world, you're not getting through to your main demographics. How does the church communicate? Who's seen The Office? Please tell me I'm not that dated. Raise your hand high. Okay, I feel a little bit better now. I discovered it. I watched it live. I didn't discover it on Netflix or whatever, Peacock, whatever it is now. There's a scene in The Office where Michael, the boss, has to discipline a salesman, Stanley, and doesn't want to because he's afraid of conflict. And so the hilarious joke being essentially Dwight coming up with this organization chart, especially the nuclear option where Dwight gets to do whatever he wants. Couldn't be a more fitting example for the church organizational structure communications-wise. Swap Dwight for the Pope. Theoretically, the Pope should be able to come in and communicate system-wide for everybody. That does not happen, can't happen, especially on social media. You would think that that would be the case, but that is the misconception. Instead, you're left with the rest of it, which is the dotted lines, the multiple reports, the multiple different hierarchical organizations. Some are grayed out for some strange reason. There's someone has a straight line all the way to the bottom. That's how the Catholic Church functions. We are a disparate network of small to moderate, and in some cases big, nonprofit organizations in hierarchical structure. There's your parish where you go to church, answers to a diocese that may or may not have a communication structure. The diocese answers technically both to a bishop's conference, where they are really only supposed to advocate for kind of policy, but the Vatican's kind of giving them a renewed organizational role, and we don't have anywhere near the amount of time to talk about what that's supposed to look like. And then, of course, you answer to your province, to the Vatican, any number of places. I'm not even getting into Catholic schools and how their organization fits. Then there are ecclesial movements, which are just movements of people that decided they kind of want to do something and pray the same way. Sometimes they're approved, sometimes they're not. And then there are religious orders of varying degrees. And then, of course, there's you, and there's me, and there's the Twitter priests that we're going to really probably bash later in the presentation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I guess the point that I want to leave you and our viewers are, if you are in any way Catholic, nominally Catholic, if you are affiliated Catholic on media, you are the whole church to someone who follows you. Because that person's probably not following the Pope. Maybe they are. But there's at least somebody in your followers that, if you affiliate as Catholic, you are the example of what a Christian witness is, of what a Catholic is, of how Catholics behave, of what they believe, of who they interact with. And that is both an incredible blessing and a deep challenge. And that's sort of why we're in the Catholic communications predicament that we're in, because of people that don't take that responsibility as seriously as I think they ought to. But before we get to that, how does the media communicate Catholicism? Secular media is Fox, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, etc. We're talking about the mainstream quote unquote media. I picked a recent story from this year. Now, for those who don't know or don't remember, Pope Francis recently clarified a bit of doctrine that allows a priest to bless a same-sex union outside of a marriage. It was an historic moment and was seen as a big win for the progressive side of the church. Now, if you look at the different headlines here, you're not exactly hearing that story. If you see Fox News, they focus very much on the negative part of a lengthy statement that was almost universally positive, because Fox News is more of a Republican or conservative branded a media outlet, and their viewers and listeners are more conservative Catholics. Versus Reuters, you see Reuters with Pope defends same-sex blessings, declaring it, says it's misunderstood, and then you have NPR, which is sort of middle-of-the-road headlines. This is what happened, evaluate it for yourself. And then you have MSNBC and CNN that talk about the Pope's statement as a real triumph, MSNBC, or focus on the controversy, which is what CNN does best. Essentially, all of these outlets took the Pope's statement, the Pope, and fit it into their agenda for their viewers, for their people. Now, some might say that's a good thing. They're making it digestible. But I think in doing what they're doing, this sort of selective reporting, they're trying to fit Catholics into a box. All Catholics think this. All Catholics view this. Or worse, these Catholics are perfect Republicans. These Catholics are perfect Democrats. And not these Catholics are Catholic. Complicated, they don't fit into, we don't fit into any major party, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the reason that they do that, number one, it's easier, it's quick reporting. The news has to turn around very fast these days. The news cycle is, it might not even be 18 hours, sometimes it's 48. But also because a lot of religion reporters have retired or been let go. So accuracy and nuance often suffers. I can think even in my time working for the Diocese of Bridgeport, we used to have reporters that covered the church as their only job. And you'd be able to talk to them and say, hey, look, there's this thing that's happening here. I'm not trying to be evasive. It's complicated. Here's how the structure works. Here's what we're dealing with. Here's what I can tell you. And they would work with you to make sure that what they did, they covered something that was fair, that was just, and that was accurate. Now, for people that don't speak church, that don't understand the complexities that we have to deal with, the complex structure that I just scratched the surface with you earlier, mistakes happen. And the church's organization doesn't mesh well with the speed of today's digital journalism. It just doesn't. The church doesn't move very quick. In a crisis these days, you really have minutes to hours to communicate before the narrative takes off. The church has never moved in minutes and hours on anything in its life. No entity, no part of the church really has. And so it's uncomfortable doing that. 2,000-year-old institutions don't survive acting impulsively like that. And so it's just an incompatibility that for the last 20 years we've not solved. There are also misconceptions or ignorance about the church structure. We're going to get into a little bit of that later about what exactly those misconceptions are. But the secular media doesn't understand sort of the nuance of like, well, this certain thing happened at the parish level, and you're talking to the diocesan communications guy who doesn't know what's happening there, or this happened in a Catholic school, but that school is independent. It's not affiliated with the diocese, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And every organization has these sort of pitfalls, right? There's all this sort of complicated bureaucracy. The church just has 2,000 years of it. So we have a lot more. And of course, unfortunately, because we live in this society where media is owned by capitalistic entities, clicks drive traffic, which drives money. So what drives clicks? Unfortunately, it's scandal. Now, the church has certainly deserved the reporting it's received on the scandals that have occurred. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there's really no room for positivity, both self-inflicted and also because of the way that the media works. So you're not really hearing anything good about the Catholic Church. For instance, we're hearing a lot about, justifiably so, the Catholic Church's foray into politics, its political season. We're not hearing a lot about what Catholic Charities is doing on the ground in Kentucky and North Carolina and West Virginia. Now, I'd like to hear both, not just the positivity. I think the scandals are extraordinarily important to cover and hold people accountable. But the secular media just functionally doesn't have time for that. Now, how do Catholics communicate Catholicism? Well, we have the institutional church. We have a bishop. You guys right now are in the Diocese of Bridgeport. Your bishop is Bishop Frank Caggiano. I worked for him. He's a great guy. Tell him I said hi when he comes. He used to have a robust social media presence, which was designed essentially to communicate to people in Fairfield County, which was his responsibility. Then there are diocesan accounts. A diocese is essentially the big office governing body that is canonically, which means empowered by the church, empowered to communicate and work with the bishop on various issues of faith in the whole county or in the whole area. They usually have accounts. They usually communicate the big stuff. We're doing a mass for teachers. We're doing a mass for, healthcare workers. The bishop is going here. The bishop's doing that. Then there are individual parish accounts. If you belong to a parish or you have a church that you like to worship at, chances are they have a moderately maintained Facebook page, maybe not much else. Hopefully they have more, where they post blurry iPhone photos of a fish fry and a flyer that was designed in 1998 that they reuse for a ministry that they do, but they're really trying their best. So usually if they're doing it, we just give them positive points. And then of course there are individual clergy, good, bad, and otherwise. This was a bad one. This is Father Longenecker. He is a notorious Twitter priest. You can look him up. He likes to get really divisive and really involved in making other people, and basically discussing other people's Catholicity. And this is the Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, which is just a lovely picture of people at a mass with Cardinal Gregory. And I had to cut it out for space, but it did very, very well for people that were just looking for a good news story. Then there are auxiliary Catholic accounts. We are at a Catholic university. This counts. Fairfield counts. Fairfield does Catholic things and communicates Catholic things rather well, not just for Jesuit schools, but sort of writ large. And it's more about communicating the ethos of who you are. You don't have to bash people over the head with, go to church, go do this thing. It's more the Jesuit principles of men and women for others and the whole per cura personalis, the whole person. You want to infuse that into your communications, which Fairfield does almost flawlessly. And then there are ecclesial movements that have a very specific, what's called a charism, sort of a thing they focus on, maybe a type of prayer that they really like, a particular devotion. They communicate. I can't really paint them with a broad brush, but they exist sort of outside of the institutional structure of the diocese. And then there are religious orders. Jesuits are one of them. They also communicate rather well. Not just because I'm at Fairfield, but they do a great job. And that's, those are for people, you might say, well, what do the Jesuits have to communicate? People that affiliate with that type of spirituality, that are perhaps no longer at a university or don't have regular encounters with Jesuit priests. That's the tether to that order. Now to the good stuff. How do Catholics communicate Catholicism? Badly. Very badly. This is just stuff from this week directed at me. So I wrote an article for NCR talking about how there are some social media Catholics that believe the government does, in fact, control the weather. And that got that got very well-measured, appropriate responses, like, Johnny Gross should go get AIDS if he doesn't already have it. And John Grosso is a lying POS. So that was fun. But these are the loudest voices on Catholic social media. This is just Twitter, because Twitter is easy, because people are immediate, doesn't give you a chance to think, and you get comments like this. But it's everywhere. These are the people that are usually in their bio. It'll be like Catholic, husband, father. It's like, ooh, and you're telling people to get AIDS. Don't want to know what that home life is like. These are the most vocal, and it's certainly not, in any sense, the majority of Catholics, but they are the most vocal, they are the most visible, and they are the most tenacious Catholics online right now. They're also, because of the way Twitter works now, more likely to have the blue mark, which makes them seem more legit than they actually are, which is a pain in the butt, but it is what it is. There are often people that will hide behind like a saint image and a Latin-y kind of name, not really revealing their identity. And they'll hurl insults like this all day at people. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've gone somewhere where people say, oh, I've seen what they're, I've seen the Catholics on social media. Catholics on social media make like the political discourse and the fighting look tame. These are our representatives. This is what we're really contending with. I think the organizations, by and large, communicate maybe not well, but definitely nicely. This, not so much. We also have, we'll get back to that, but we also have Catholic influencers now. And I'm going to make a sweeping statement that will probably get me a little bit in trouble for those watching the live stream, but I'm going to do it anyway. The influencer culture and Catholicism are entirely incompatible. Because in order to be a good influencer, you have to build an affiliation with me, yourself, I. Look at all these statements. All have I statements. They're benign. But this is someone that is making their career communicating for the church. You are trying to get people to affiliate with you. You are trying to build a cult of personality around you. And if you're trying to communicate for Christ or for an organization, kind of a big no-no. So the influencer culture as it's currently stated, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying we can't use it because we're not communicating for ourselves. We're communicating for Jesus. At least that's what we say we're doing. Or at the very minimum, we're communicating on behalf of the institutional church. And if you're making it all about you, you're kind of obstructing that. Let's talk about some challenges and misconceptions. Again, something might get me in a little bit of trouble. Let's just name it. Catholics are not very good at using social media. It's not our fault. We're not good at change. We've been very fast to adopt new media right up until now, but this is extra double plus bonus points fast. And the reason that we're bad at it is because we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. We're trying too hard to get people to go somewhere. Usually you're scrolling on your phone at night or when you're bored or when you're trying to pass the time or look busy and you don't really know what to do. You're not looking to look for an event and say, oh, well, you know what I really want to do now that I'm in my pajamas, watching TV is go to insert event here. Or donate some money when I don't have my wallet on me and I haven't set up Apple Pay. We're using it exclusively to funnel people to in-person activities. Now look, that makes sense. The church is sacramental, which means we do things in person. We do things, you can't baptize someone on social media. But the way the Vatican sees it, there was this document the Vatican published I had a little bit of a hand in helping with called Towards Full Presence, where it talks about digital media being the digital continent, a place where people are, go, will always be, and need to be ministered to. And of course, at the end of the day, yeah, we would love for them to come to an in-person engagement with us. But if they're not doing that, they still need to be loved there, online, where they inhabit. We're also trying too hard to tame or control social media. As I've showed you before, there's no controlling that. It is what it is. To control social media would be controlling people, which I know the church has tried to do in its history, but it's never ended well. So we have to be careful about trying to bring a positive example to the medium without necessarily exerting our control, which is just not possible. We're trying to promote ourselves or advance our own personal ideologies or just get more followers at the expense of unity. Or my personal favorite, there are people that use social media, Catholics, of course we're talking about specifically, that use it just to kind of beat up on other people, to dunk on people, make them look silly, to advance their own ideology or liturgical preference. And that's a poor example of faith to the rest of the world. Imagine not being a person of faith. You might not be in here. Again, no judgment. And you saw the go get AIDS tweet. You going to run to church after that? No. Probably not. You're going to say, I don't want to be associated with that guy or whatever that guy thinks. That's a terrible thing to say to somebody. And that's not even, there's stuff I had to censor. I couldn't put up here. So we're a poor example of faith to the rest of the world. And it's because of that tribalism and win-loss mentality. We're approaching dialogue as an opportunity to win. Religion and politics are not sports. They're religion and politics. And so if there is a loser in either one of those, it has real-world implications. It's not sports where, again, I'm a huge Yankee fan, and I stayed up way too late watching the game last night, and my daughter rewarded me by waking up the minute I went to go to sleep. But at the end of the day, it's men playing a game, and if they lose, my long-term mental health and physical well-being will not be impacted, despite what I think in the moment. With politics and religion, when someone loses, you're talking about people's lives and their souls. It's not good. Then of course, there's also disillusionment related to the sexual abuse crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, scandal after scandal, moments of personal rejection. If you went to a church, tried to be someone's godparent, they said, no, you need to pass whatever insert Catholic test is here. No, we don't want to baptize your child. No, you're gay, so you can't come here, that sort of thing. These moments of rejection find their way into social media, and they fatigue the rest of us when you look at that and you go, again, do I want to be associated with an entity? Do I want to label that, carry that label, that moniker with me? And then, of course, the church, whenever it gets involved into politics, left or right, is a disaster. Now, misconceptions. There are a not insignificant amount of people that believe one of, if not all three of these things. The first is that the Vatican has an unlimited amount of money that they can use for anything and everything church-related, that they have a money tree. It's the only money tree in the world. It's in a Vatican property, and they can shake it and do whatever they want. Or they can liquefy the Vatican Bank at the snap of a fingers, and that would definitely not cause any major geopolitical trauma, and pay for insert small local thing here. I hear that a lot when a school or a parish is going to close. It's, well, why doesn't the Vatican sell a very expensive chalice and keep the school open? It's just not systematically possible. No, I don't know how many people are looking for gold-plated chalices anyway. And the Vatican itself is a city-state. It is a functioning sovereign nation that has to pay for itself, that is operating at a deficit right now, much to Pope Francis's chagrin. So that's just not a possible thing that can happen. So yes, the church has a lot of money, but it doesn't really. All of us are nonprofits. The majority of church organizations are not for profits. Your local parish, unless it's in a very, very wealthy area, is probably struggling. Probably can't really afford to pay its people living wages. It probably, if the pastor sees a really down week in the collection, is looking at it going, uh-oh, it's winter coming and I have to keep the heat on. It's not the Middle Ages where churches were sort of the center of power and government. I mean, it's hard out there. The second thing is Catholics all vote the same, think the same, and act the same. If I had $1 for every single person that came up to me and said, you are Catholic, so you must be a Republican. I'm not going to tip my hand on that, but no. In fact, NCR, where I work, just did a poll where Catholics are pretty evenly divided between Democratic, Republican, and Catholics are pretty evenly divided on settled matters of the church. The majority of Catholics are pro-choice in the United States. The majority of Catholics support LGBTQ rights in the United States. The majority of Catholics support ending the death penalty in the United States. A minority of Catholics support immigration rights in the United States. That's the only one out of what I just named to you is named in the Bible as something that is sort of a requirement. So I'm not casting aspersions on what people believe or not, but it's different. We are not a monolith. We are not a monolith. The third thing is the church can just wave a magic wand and insert thing here, and everything will be fixed. It can use its political power. It can use its might. The church is also, I've heard the conspiracy theories, the church is trying to rig this, rig that. Is the church in the room with us now? Because if you've paid attention, there is no universal monolithic church that communicates. It doesn't exist, not even the Pope. The Pope got criticized relentlessly just last week, for saying that the death penalty is bad. So there is no, even though we are a top-down hierarchical structure, then when the Pope speaks in a certain way, it is ex cathedra, it is infallible, which means to say when the Pope speaks, that's that. That's not how it plays out in Catholic communications. So, all that is to say, how do we communicate? Well, it's pretty simple. It's really look at what it's currently happening in the individual level and just do the opposite. The first is the institution needs to stop slamming the door on people in their moment of need. In the Diocese of Bridgeport, we used to play a game in the communications office where we tried to see how many days it would take for us to get complaints from people where all 7 sacraments would have been denied for some reason. We never made it past Thursday. Repeatedly, the door was being slammed at people in their moment of need, a baptism, a marriage, a funeral. That happens on social media, but it also happens just writ large, the way that the church communicates in the individual level. We got to be better than that. We want to lead with love and compassion. Take a page out of Pope Francis's book. It's about encountering someone where they are, not forcing them to go where we want them to be, but walking with them on their journey wherever it takes. And it's standing up for what we believe in. And these are all examples of that. I mean, this is a bishop in a moment of pure joy baptizing a child. More of that and less of the please vote this way. The one on the bottom left, my left, Crisis Magazine, notoriously conservative. The engine behind the AIDS tweet about me and the John Grosso is a lying POS. Tweeting their condolences and prayers for a liberal theologian who was an incredible person, by the way, in a moment of bipartisanship. It was beautiful, really, truly it was, and I want to give them specific credit for doing that. And then, of course, this is the Pope getting yelled at for the death penalty. But this person, Ryan, standing up, no, the Pope said it's wrong. The Catechism says it's wrong. Macro, how do we communicate? We don't have time, but we can discuss we can discuss offline, introducing discernment into how you communicate. And it's just very simple. What is your goal? Why are you on these social media outlets? How can you make them 1% better? What are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? Is there a social media outlet that draws you into, we would say sin, but into bad vibes, feeling, or acting wrongly? Sometimes Twitter is that for me. I can get very snarky. But that's not good for the kingdom. That's not good for other people. Keeping up to date with best practices, whether that's formatting or filming a video or an image correctly, whether that's using appropriate punctuation or appropriate slang if you're talking to a group. Like, I don't understand half of the words that are coming out of Gen Z and Alpha. And according to my brother, nobody understands me. So just learning how to communicate with the group that you're talking to as opposed to the group that you're a part of. And of course, I always talk about Digital Examine. We are Jesuits. You guys are here at a Jesuit university, so again, kind of generally understanding what your approach to communications is. And if you can, taking at least a brief pause for reflection and prayer. What does God want from my communication here? Or does this make me a good person or a bad person? Do I want my parent to see this? Do I want my future self to see this? Am I going to cringe? Am I going to, is this going to make the world a little better, a little brighter? So lastly, of course, 3 points. If anybody has to report back on what you learned here they are. The church is not a monolith. It's made up of different groups, different organizations with different goals, different constituents, legal and canonical separations that sometimes prevent a lot of cross-pollination and communications, and makes communications very disparate and very divided. Number 2, the church adopting secular communication strategies, i.e. trying to get people to go somewhere, trying to do clickbait, trying to stoke controversy to drive clicks. Not good, didn't work for us, probably because we're the whole love thy neighbor religion. So perhaps we should adopt best practices from the secular world on how to format things, how to build a strategy as opposed to how to drive clicks. That has destroyed our credibility and our effectiveness. But we can make up both of those things with nuance and pastoral kindness. Nuance is understanding that the church is complex, that people are complex, and so the person behind the keyboard is probably not the Antichrist that wants to end your life or is absolutely diametrically opposed to who you are. It's probably a person with a family, friends, lives, hopes, dreams. And pastoral kindness is understanding that the way to change that person's heart is to love them where they are, and to do that authentically. And I guess understanding that the stakes are enormous. Again, if you affiliate with Catholic in any way in your media or even just in your way of being, you are the entire church to somebody. And it's an awesome responsibility. But it means we're dealing with people's souls. So we want to act accordingly. Okay. I keep going, but that's probably not a good idea. So any questions, concerns, thoughts, heckles? I can take them as I showed you.
I personally think it's okay to say sin once in a while, but I'm a theologian. So. John, thank you so much. That was pitch perfect. It was very understandable, and it surprised me in a few ways. Now, I have a few questions out here, and my other friend will go to her mic to help track those people down. But I just wanted to ask a few things, and the fun thing about all these talks, people, is I get to take the speaker to dinner afterward and get all of his secrets, so that'll be great.
Oh boy.
Okay. But I want to ask you two things. One is communication, particularly in the Twitter sphere where I still reside, sort of.
Where you and I hang out, yeah.
Yeah, looking through the crowds, the talk about church often is fairly gendered. The persons who get most exercised seem to be male persons. I don't think that's always true, and I don't know who hides behind the, Latin phrase, picture of some obscure saint thing. What do you think's going on there?
Oh, this is like.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you don't have
This
to
is
answer
good.
the whole
No,
thing.
this is my digital discernment and like just generally being a good human on social media is like my number one. My number two is what the heck is wrong with men right now? I'm a girl dad, I'm a feminist, and so the Catholic Church has a man problem. I think, first of all, our clergy can only be men, so right off the bat, there's a power imbalance. And second of all, I think years of systematic and systemic abuse, really, or organizational restriction, I think has caused a lot of women to just say, I'm just going to do the work. I'm not going to deal with the crap. And that's only to our detriment.
Yeah, okay. That is a fair answer. I appreciate that very much. The other thing that you said we should avoid influencer culture. Now, we could do the gender observation there too, of course. I'm just thinking of things like, I'm thinking of two things. One is, so when I first started being a theologian here in Fairfield County, I would frequently get invited to give a talk at a parish for an adult education evening. On a Friday night, they'd want me to talk about something or another, and we'd have wine and cheese after, and they would give me $100 maybe, and I'd give it back, and I'd say, save it for the youth group pizza fund, because that's just sort of our outreach. And among all of my theologian friends, we are rarely invited to do that anymore. And part of that is we don't have this culture of adult education, but part of it is this celebrity pyramid scheme about who are the voices who speak for the church. And it's become, the funnel is much narrower. Now, am I right about that? What do you think here?
Absolutely. Well, you're right about everything, Nancy. But yes, absolutely. I think just sort of twofold there is the first is there is an inherent busyness to our culture that capitalism demands. And so, I think about my wife and I, like, I would love, that sounds awesome. But I mean, of course, we have a child. But even before that, we were torn in 1,000 different directions with multiple different jobs just to sort of make ends meet. And there's this glorification of busy culture. So that's part one. But part two, this influencer culture, it's, there's a line in Scripture, don't say you belong to Paul, don't say you belong to Peter, you belong to Christ. And we've done the exact opposite. There's this real funnel at the top that's just people,
There are like
It's
three
agenda-based.
voices. There are three voices that, are
Oh,
invited
yeah.
to do religious education.
Yeah.
There are three voices that are invited to speak to large diocesan groups.
Yep.
It has kind of, and I think that is a result of this social media.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
There's
Now-
just a quick last little tidbit on that, and then I'll obviously open it up to the students, is the Eucharistic revival, I think, was a perfect example of that. There were a number of wonderful speakers there, but there were the speakers that were there at this big Eucharistic revival in Indianapolis were the same people that have been making the national circuit again and again and again and again. And so people kept asking me, well, are you going? Well, first of all, no, I have a toddler. I don't go anywhere. I'm not going to Indianapolis for fun. But second of all, I've heard all of these people speak multiple times, many times over, and it doesn't mean they're not good, but they're essentially consolidating power at a certain point.
Right, and this is huge. We'll talk about this.
Oh, yeah.
But I do have a
At dinner.
couple questions here. Andrew, do you have a question? And do we have a mic over there for Andrew?
How are you, John?
Good, how you doing?
My name is Andrew. I am a second-year finance major here. My question is, what was your drive or why factor for being in Catholic media?
Well, it's a good question. I fell into it ass backwards, just to be honest with you. My number one piece of advice, my brother ignored it fragrantly to go into finance, was major in, which I think helped, but it's major in something that makes you think. So I majored in political science and did all my internships for various campaigns and political organizations thinking, doing it, going into politics. Had theology on the side because I needed to fill credits, and I knew I was good at that. And graduated, realized I hated asking people for money, which is 99.9% of modern campaigning, and you can't work in government if you don't campaign. So I thought, well, that's out. Now I'm screwed. Spent a lot of money on a Boston College degree, no idea where to go, and did sort of the typical Jesuit discernment. Well, what am I actually good at? I wanted to do politics. What does that mean? Bore you with the details, but figured out I'm good at relatively communicating. So I applied for jobs, and the Holy Spirit guided me to the one at the Diocese of Bridgeport, where Bishop Frank took a chance, and my boss Brian took a chance on a 22-year-old who had a loud mouth and didn't really know the mechanics of what he was doing, but knew he was good at communications, and made sure I got my master's degree and kind of went on from there. So that was how I fell into it. I've made my career in it because of what I showed you here. Those voices that speak disparagingly or are poor examples of our faith, I'm really sick and tired of them. I love being a Catholic. I don't think that means we need to discriminate against people or close the door on people, and that is apparently controversial, and so I want to make sure that my voice and voices far more marginalized than I am are heard. So that's how I got into it, and that's how I stayed, because the pay is not what keeps me here.
Thank you, great question. Do we have another question from the crowd here? Gabby. And then anyone else? We're going to open this up, please.
Hello, my name's Gabriella. It's my first year here at Fairfield. I'm undecided, and I have a question for you. I wanted to know what you would recommend to someone who wants to be Catholic in today's day and age, but with all the media and like all the bad stuff that they kind of shame on Catholicism, and it kind of, I feel like, would hold them back. Personally, that's what I would think. So what would you recommend to someone who wants to be a Catholic, but, you know, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff kind of has stuff shaming Catholicism?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. It's a really, really good question, because it sort of encapsulates everything we're talking about here. The first thing I would say is the gospel is not controversial. I mean, it was back then, but for the gospel, the synoptics, John is very, very highfalutin. I would recommend that one last. But getting to know who Jesus is and who he cares about and why he cares about them, that to me is sort of the foundation of why I'm a Catholic. In Matthew 25, whatever you do for the least of these, you've done for me. Lord, how do we get to heaven? That's how. By helping people, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the imprisoned, welcoming the stranger, etc. That is the rubric Jesus lays out. And so everything flows from that for me. And that's also the rubric of our communications. At the end of the day, what we're called to do in the scriptures repeatedly, again and again and again and again by Jesus, is to upset the paradigm of our own consciousness of thinking of who is our neighbor. It's everybody. We're supposed to love everybody. We're supposed to help everybody. We're supposed to be an asset to everybody. And when you look at the other stuff that's being communicated right now, it's just noise. It's incorrect noise. And so yes, sometimes carrying around that scarlet letter of I'm a Catholic and these people belong to my tent is a real challenge. And so for that, I am grateful for the times that I and anybody else has the chance to push back on that and tell, no, you don't speak for Catholics. I do. Jesus does, actually. But every organization has people like that, both political parties, this university, Boston College. There are always going to be sort of those bad apples, and if we let the bad apples spoil the whole batch, well, then the world's going to be worse off for it. So I would say go bring your positive witness to Catholicism, and just do your best from the little corner that you have.
Thank you so much.
Back here, please. Thank you.
Hi, John.
you doing?
Thanks for coming out. Good. How are you?
Good.
So my name is Bobby. I'm a senior psychology major.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
You're doing great. Just power through it.
I'm gonna move forward a little bit. So, as a professional in this sphere, I'm curious what you would say we should do as college students who are using social media a lot to sort of combat the issues and the stigma surrounding Catholicism on social media. Like, if we could do anything to help this this culture, what would you recommend we do?
Well, the first thing is be normal, please. If you want to, if you're going to put it in your bio or even mention it on a video or in a post that you're Catholic, just be normal. We just need normal Catholics. Just, run of the mill. You're a psychology major at a beautiful university. You have, I'm presuming you have hobbies and interest in a life, and so to show people that you don't need to be a priest or a nun or uber duper, like super religious in order to be Catholic, to affiliate with Catholicism. That is half the battle, is just sort of being normal. The second is I think just using social media sustainably. I don't know if anybody saw this report, and it is in vogue to bash TikTok right now. I do admit it, but TikTok leaked accidentally or on purpose their own internal, we'll say survey, but analysis and research that showed that one gets physically addicted to the medium after 263 videos. They were able to get it down to the video, 90 minutes and 263 videos. You are now fitting the textbook definition of addict. TikTok's not the only one. There are people that, especially in election season, that doom scroll Twitter or X. There are people, I will not say for whom I am, for whom I am related to, that are chronically online on Facebook. But it's just checking yourself and using it sustainably. Am I spending too much time here at the detriment of another part of my life? Just kind of focusing on the whole person is kind of part two. Part one, be normal. You don't need to go preaching. You don't need to, you don't need to start yelling at everyone, go to church. Just be normal and be loving, stand up for people that are marginalized. And part two is take care of your whole person. Have social be just a part of that. If you're taking care of the other parts of yourself, you will hopefully be taking care of the social media part of yourself.
Right.
That make
Thank you.
sense?
Yeah,
Or
it
was that
does.
a cop-out? It was a little bit of a cop-out.
No, that was a great
Okay,
answer.
good.
Thanks. Appreciate your time.
Of course.
Other questions out here? I appreciated that you said that, if you want to be on social media as a Catholic, just show that you're a person.
Yes, please.
That matters a lot. And the other thing is, and I think this is tempting, you don't have to have all the answers.
No.
You can say, I don't know.
Yeah.
You can say, I pray about that too. I don't have an answer to that. And, I think, I'm kind of, I get a little feisty, and I can't show it on Twitter, so I type that into a little message to myself, and then I delete it. But I do sort of get that urge to strike back,
Right.
and to have the last word, and to have the little coup de grace on that thing. And that's just, boy, it's not appealing to anyone.
No, the only time I would say that that's justified is if you're standing up for someone or if you're pushing back on a narrative. So if there's really, I do this own internal discernment, and half the time I get it wrong. Does this narrative, if left unchecked, make us look, is it inauthentic? Or is it harming the dignity of someone? If it's harming someone's dignity, as long as you are respectful, get in there. Go fight for someone. Go fight for, marginalized LGBTQ, the migrant, the poor. Get in there and get your hands dirty, but just do it respectfully. But if it's, you just want to score political points or yell at someone, or you're like me and you're screaming and yelling about the New York Yankees, nobody gets any better from an argument online about that.
Oh, good point. Last question from me. Anything else from the audience here? It's so nice to see you all here. The title of your text here is Tweeting and Tradition. Now, we all know it's X.
Yes. Oh,
okay.
they still use tweeting interchangeably.
I
sometimes. It's a mess.
refuse. I just call
Oh,
it
I
Twitter.
can't do it. No,
It's just Twitter.
I've never been one of those people. I just can't do it.
Right. So that really, it seems like it occupies a large space, and it's your job. But in terms of all the other ways in which Catholicism is communicated, what else do you think is useful? Here's my example. We have a bulletin at our parish. I don't know if you're familiar with a parish. Has anyone ever seen a parish bulletin? You saw our bulletin then.
Anyone ever
'cause they
held
all look
one?
the same. I mean, I think there's one bulletin company that
Yes.
sends out the same. There
All
isn't
look the
the-
same.
They all look the same. And in fact, I'm guessing we could just swap our content week to week. No one would notice. You know, the choir's rehearsing. You know, it's just. Why do some forms of communication stick, like the bulletin, when there are so many more theoretically more effective ways to do it?
Well, I've worked with, I have a number, I'm a communications consultant on the side, and so I've worked with a number of clients. The bulletin's just comfortable for some pastors. That's what they grew up with. That's what they're nostalgic about. And that's what the demographic of the church that is most, that's most attentive and loudest want. So I think it's comfortable and it's easy, so you stick with it. Same reason some parishes have the same outdated website that's really just a link to their bulletin. You know, I think it's important, but to me, the single most important piece of church communication is the homily you hear at Mass.
Oh, okay. And is that sufficiently attended to? I've heard a bunch of different homilies.
Yeah, no, I think my hot take, and I'll get skewered
Okay.
by this, is if you have good music and a good homily, it's going to cure the majority of the challenges that our churches face. As there's too many people, now the bishops obviously are trying to communicate very heavily about the Eucharist right now. The Eucharist is Jesus, absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. That's like step 25. Step 1 and 2 are someone coming into church and wanting to feel meaning of any kind. Life is hard, I'm here. Tell me that it's going to be okay. Somehow, some way. Tell me that it is going to be okay. Tell me that this was not for nothing. So if you get good music that makes you feel a sense of something greater than yourself, and you get a homily that you go at the end of the day, you know, maybe I didn't agree with all of that, but this really stuck with me. That's more effective than anything I could script, even for the large audience that NCR or my clients have, because you're appealing to that person's, I think, a hunger in that person's soul.
Would you please put that on a postcard, and we will personally send it to every bishop in the United States. Can we say thank
That
you
got me
to
in a lot of
John
trouble.
Grosso? This was great. That was great. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you all. I really appreciate you coming out on a weeknight and listening to me talk about church communications and being a nerd. So thank you. Really appreciate that.